This is Weekly Business View, recapping the top business stories impacting world financial markets.
Welcome to this week's edition of Weekly Business View. I'm Sue Herrera.
And I'm Dean Shepard. All week long, economists, investors, and the Fed were watching and waiting, trying to get into optimal positions for Friday's August unemployment numbers. And all for this, unchanged. The government reports the unemployment rate held steady at 6.8%, while the number of jobs improved only slightly. Kevin McCullough reports basically the labor market mirrored what's going on in the overall economy. Generally stagnant conditions and meager gains.
For people stuck on unemployment lines, the August jobs data offered little encouragement. Few new jobs were created and the unemployment rate didn't budge. At 6.8%, the jobless rate was the same as July. 34,000 new jobs were created, while the number of people without work stayed at 8.5 million.
What it tells us is the economy is flat. However, we did get that increase in the average work week of 0.9%. Add that to the 0.4% increase in average hourly earnings, and we find that earned income probably posted a very solid advance in the month of August.
That helps people who already have jobs, particularly factory jobs, which went up 42,000 in August, as average hourly wages went up 4 cents. There has been some improvement since the beginning of the year, when non-farm payrolls were shrinking at the rate of over 200,000 a month. But after a spike up in May that now looks like a fluke, job growth turned negative again, with the July figures revised downward to 73,000 jobs lost before the final upturn in August. According to economist DeLaw Smith, the gains aren't coming in the traditional areas of strength.
We've seen a little revival in the goods-producing side on the employment picture. But on the service-producing side, which was the engine throughout the whole 1980s, we had such enormous gains in the service-producing side, we have seen nothing.
Service-producing jobs, like most office jobs, managed a gain of only 10,000 despite their huge proportion of the total. Still, that was better than construction, which lost 12,000, and mining, where 6,000 jobs vanished. Overall, the jobs picture is consistent with an economy that is still struggling to get a recovery going, a status quo report. Not the kind of thing that's likely to encourage consumers to spend any more money. Kevin McCullough, CNBC, FNN.
Earlier in the week, there was an unexpectedly strong showing from the manufacturing sector's index, its third straight monthly reading above 50%. That's a sign of an expanding economy. The Commerce Department also reported a significant rise in construction spending during July, up 1.6%. That follows a revised drop of 0.1% in June.
A week of anticipation in the bond market, with traders keeping the market in a very narrow range all week as they waited for that latest reading on the jobs market. The unemployment report was supposed to answer all the remaining questions as to the health of the U.S. economic recovery, but it did not. In fact, it seems the picture may have become even foggier. The latest reading on employment shows some improvement in jobs created, but that gain was more than offset by an upward revision in the number of jobs lost back in July. Bond traders chose to view the report as essentially weak, rallying prices on the expectation the Fed still has ample room in the near future to ease credit. By the end of Friday's session, the long bond was up 28/32 to yield 8.01%, and Fed funds finished at 5 7/16.
A major shakeup this week in the trading department at Shearson Lehman Brothers. Late Thursday, the brokerage firm suspended its two top traders, Peter DePuzzo and Emmanuel Geronimos, pending the results of an investigation into alleged trading violations in connection with an offering of Conagra shares in November of last year. Jack Rivlin, the co-head of the firm's equities trading division, has been named to take charge of the trading department. Shares of American Express, Shearson's parent company, slipped 3/8 on the week to finish at 26 1/8.
A House subcommittee held its first public examination of Solomon's bond trading practices on Wednesday. The Securities and Exchange Commission has now issued more than 135 subpoenas and requests for information in its Solomon probe. Brenda Butner reports from Washington.
Okay, thank you.
The new man in charge of Solomon Brothers received a warm welcome on Capitol Hill, but lawmakers wasted no time in delivering clear-cut advice.
He said, kick some butt and take some names.
Warren Buffett was just as clear in outlining his style of command.
Lose money for the firm and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation for the firm and I will be ruthless.
Much more than a shred has already been lost since news broke that Solomon cheated in several Treasury auctions and that top executives there kept quiet after discovering the abuse.
These actions are unconscionable.
The chairman of the SEC suggests they may also be widespread, a part of the corporate culture.
The firm's silence throughout this time frame raises serious questions about whether there was a climate within Solomon that appeared to tolerate or even to encourage wrongdoing.
Some in Congress say the scandal also raises questions about the industry's regulators. The Treasury Department is put in the position of policing its underwriters.
And once the market figures out that anything goes, then everything does.
The SEC has called for tougher laws on debt sales, urging lawmakers to make it against the law to use false information when exchanging government bonds and to increase public access to pricing data. Congress is also considering automating the auction process and strengthening the role of the SEC.
The SEC is a cop with no nightstick and no map of the streets on the beat.
Chairman Buffett says tougher regulation would be welcomed.
I have no problem with tough rules, tough cops, and tough prosecution.
With the Solomon scandal at center stage, Congress could use its reauthorization of the Government Securities Act as a forum to make changes in the industry. Both the SEC and Treasury want lawmakers to wait at least 3 months. That's when both agencies expect to report the results of their investigations. Brenda Butner, CNBC FNN, Washington.
On Thursday, Treasury Undersecretary Robert Glauber says that he's pleased with how the Solomon scandal is being handled so far.
My reading of what went on in the Solomon scandal and in the government securities market is that really the regulation worked pretty well. This fraud, admitted fraud now, has been uncovered. I think we moved quite effectively and in a quite timely manner to deal with it.
In an effort to answer congressional calls, Solomon says it will deny payment of severance, bonuses, and legal fees to its former chairman, John Goodfriend, and 3 other former top executives who resigned in the wake of its Treasury auction scandal. And more bad news for Solomon also came on Thursday. Standard & Poor's downgraded its rating of $4 billion of Solomon senior debt to a single A from A+, citing the brokerage firm's Treasury auctions bidding violations. The rating agency added that a further downgrade is possible. Solomon said the S&P downgrade will raise its cost of borrowing slightly. However, the firm said it has maintained its regular 16-cent a share quarterly dividend. For the week, Solomon stock lost 1.25 points to 24.
In still more fallout from the Solomon scandal, the British Treasury announced this week it has pulled Solomon from its role as lead U.S. manager in the sale of British telecommunications stock. The value of that deal is pegged at about $8.5 billion. News reports in Britain said the country's largest pension firm, likely to be a big buyer of British telecom stock, refused to deal with Solomon because Solomon allegedly submitted unauthorized bond bids using the pension firm's name.
Also in Britain this week, that nation's central bank slashed its key money market lending rate by 0.5% to 10.5%. The Bank of England said it lowered interest rates for the 7th time since mid-February in response to moderating inflation. Now, that move then prompted many commercial banks to cut their base lending rates. The timing of the rate cut, however, didn't have much of an impact on stocks in London because it's already been largely discounted by the market.
Major developments this week in the probe of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. A congressional report released on Thursday shows federal agencies ignored information about alleged illegal activities by BCCI. The report charges senior officials of the Justice Department, the IRS, and the Customs Service had files and were aware of BCCI's activities as early as 1983. Subcommittee Chairman Charles Schumer said he would not rule out the possibility of influence peddling in Washington, blocking action against BCCI. Also, 6 BCCI officials were indicted by a grand jury on charges of laundering more than $14 million in drug money through the bank's global connections. The 3-count indictment returned in Tampa called BCCI a racketeering enterprise. If convicted, the BCCI defendants face a maximum of 25 years in prison.
Still to come on Weekly Business View, a look at the stock market's performance this week.
And the outlook for this winter's oil prices. And could the tides be turning for Donald Trump? We'll have a report. Stay with us. The stock market floundered this abbreviated trading week as investors searched for further hints on the direction of the nation's economy. On Tuesday, a late bout of profit-taking drove the blue chip average down almost 26 points. More profit-taking on Wednesday pushed the Dow Industrials down further, losing over 9 points. Thursday, a lackluster session ahead of the jobless report left the Dow unchanged. But Friday, the industrial average posted its first gain in 6 sessions, gaining only 3 points, though. So for the week, the blue chip average lost a total of 31.97 points. Turning to the rest of Friday's market action, the Dow Transports lost 828 to 1174.72. The Dow Utilities lost a quarter to 206.25. Declining issues edged out advancers with 521 stocks finishing unchanged. Checking the secondary markets, the American Exchange Index advanced a third of a point. The Nasdaq Composite closed up just fractionally to 516.94. The S&P 500 slipped fractionally while the 100 lost a third of a point.
Some stocks making news this week. Unisys lost 3/8 to 5 3/8. The defense contractor pled guilty Friday to charges stemming from its role in a Pentagon procurement scandal. The company agreed to pay a record settlement of $190 million. Shares of Centocor jumped 12 points to 45 1/4. An advisory panel recommended FDA approval of Centocor's new drug Syntoxin to treat potentially fatal post-surgical infections. Zoma Technology plunged 5 3/4 to 17 1/4. In a surprise move, the FDA postponed its decision on approving Zoma's anti-infection drug for septic shock. Union Pacific picked up 2.5 this week to 91 1/8. That company declared a 2-for-1 stock split, a 9% quarterly dividend hike, and said its restructuring will result in a $575 million third quarter charge. The rail company, which is a component of the Dow Transports, says up to 4,000 jobs will be cut in the next 3 to 5 years, saving as much as $300 million.
Great debate remains over the stability and direction of oil prices for the rest of this year. The critical question is whether Saudi Arabia will produce enough oil to account for lower production from the turbulent and ever-changing Soviet Union. John Teal reports.
The case for moderate oil prices goes like this. Key swing producer Saudi Arabia will continue to ignore OPEC hawks and pump as much oil as it takes to keep prices stable. The Saudis' long-term view has always been moderate prices encourage higher demand. Furthermore, many believe the Saudis are still repaying the United States for its help in the Gulf War. Analyst David Ahl.
I think we're going to see WTI stay at $21, $22 in the range we've seen this past summer for perhaps the rest of the decade.
The case for higher oil prices is just as compelling. The turmoil in the Soviet Union makes that country's role as the world's leading oil producer extremely shaky. The Soviet Union produces roughly 1/4 of Western Europe's gas oil. That flow could easily be disrupted if the Soviet Union disintegrates into chaos. Oil production could also be undermined by sabotage or labor strikes.
The Soviet problem is going to continue to be paramount for the next 3 to 5 months. We're seeing to sort out who's in control, who has the ability to perform on contracts, and who doesn't.
Analyst Peter Butel says any current price stability is shaky.
So as I see it, you have the seesaw neatly balanced right now with the potential that OPEC could produce for some imaginary amount of demand that may never materialize, balanced on the other side by the Soviet Union, which could teeter into the brink of chaos and not be able to supply Europe with oil.
The oil market's caught in a tug of war. Saudi stability versus Soviet instability. The two forces are in balance now, but events could easily change that. John Teal, CNBC, FNN, New York.
Well, they had an improving housing market and the best interest rate environment in 4 years on their side. But the nation's privately owned savings and loans still saw lower profits during the second quarter. The Office of Thrift Supervision says the better than 2,200 savings and loans still in private hands earned nearly $387 million in 1991's second quarter after a revised first quarter profit of $610 million. Real estate losses are blamed largely for the drop. Still, it's not all bad. It is the first time the industry has seen back-to-back profitable quarters since 1986.
An increasing number of Americans are heading to bankruptcy court. The American Bankruptcy Institute says in the past 12 months, personal and business bankruptcies hit a record 880,000. The Institute blames the huge expansion of consumer and business debt in the 1980s and the recession in the 90s, which have combined to make a bad situation worse. The agency expects bankruptcy filings to top 1 million by the end of the year.
Looking for a mortgage? Well, despite falling interest rates, real estate lenders are tightening their standards, making it even tougher to get loans. Real estate correspondent Bob Pisani reports.
By almost any standards, Linda Cox has a dream job. She's art director for Cosmopolitan magazine, in charge of overseeing the world's most beautiful models. She earns a 6-figure salary. But when Linda went to refinance her mortgage, she was turned down.
I was devastated. I was floored. I was shocked. I thought I felt awful about it.
Linda was turned down because of one late mortgage payment. They also said she didn't have enough positive credit. They recommended that she go out and get credit cards.
The banks are still advertising for mortgages and low rates and come in quickly and do it before September 1st and all these special deals, and then you go in there feeling wonderful and you go out feeling like you're a deadbeat.
A spokesman for the banking industry says that banks have been looking more carefully at their customers' credit histories.
Banks are very concerned about the economic situation, and they are trying to balance the needs of their customers, and yet, on the other hand, you have the issues about the economy.
McCulloch also says that banks are worried about delinquencies. Foreclosures increased dramatically in the 1980s and have risen during the recession. Nervous banks don't want to take chances on people that may walk away from their mortgages. But if you're applying for a mortgage, don't be discouraged. Banks need to make loans or they don't make money, so they want you as a customer. But there are steps that you can take to make sure your credit isn't a problem. First, check your credit report to make sure there are no errors. Second, determine what your assets and liabilities are. Lenders look carefully at your long-term debts. Finally, if there are problems, meet with your lender to find out what you need to do to get approval. And what about Linda Cox?
Please, if you see this show, give me a mortgage.
Well, Linda still doesn't have her mortgage, but she does have a credit card. Bob Pisani, CNBC, FNN.
On Friday, the Mortgage Bankers Association said the nation's mortgage delinquency rate rose to 5.28% in the second quarter, up from 4.95% in the previous quarter.
Bankrupt Continental Airlines may be headed in a new direction. The airline is being eyed by an investor group headed by billionaire H. Ross Perot Jr. What's more, as that carrier struggles through Chapter 11 reorganization, it may be attracting some international investors. Dave Monsies reports.
Continental is listening to everyone, and this is just one scenario that's leaked out. Perot said the investor group would include Federal Express as well as 2 unidentified foreign airlines, one believed to be European, the other Asian. According to PaineWebber's Ed Starkman, it means routes and planes could combine to form an integrated linkage of routes and equipment.
If you can find a way to bring in new capital from an outside source and not have to go through a merger, that's the path to reorganization that you would choose.
Many experts say that Continental management is shopping around for many different options as well as investors. That simultaneously with ongoing cost cutting, both possibly offset, though, by a move on the part of Continental's pilots to unionize. Federal Express says reports it may buy part of Continental are, quote, categorically untrue. But sources close to the talks claim the combining of the mail and passenger airlines could pose substantial cost savings by combining maintenance operations. To Kidder Peabody's Sam Buttrick, Continental has a lot to offer if the cost is right.
The new management team at Continental is aggressively pursuing any number of options with respect to getting new capital into the carrier as part of the reorganization process. And that's why we're seeing all of these names bandied about at a very preliminary stage.
As for the foreign carriers that may be involved, a change in DOT guidelines now allows them to purchase up to 49% of U.S. carriers. And, quote Perot, Continental is a very valuable franchise for the proper group. Dave Monsies, CNBC FNN, New York.
Just after the markets closed Friday, Continental Air said it would cut 890 jobs. Also this week, a bigger, stronger Delta Airlines began taking shape less than 3 weeks after a bankruptcy court awarded Delta the bulk of Pan Am. And the new Delta shuttle got off the ground, competing directly with the Trump shuttle.
Well, speaking of Trump, the prices of Donald Trump's casino bonds have been climbing this year on renewed investor demand. Jeff Lachey has this report on the outlook for Trump's trio of Atlantic City casinos.
After 2 years of struggling with recession and overcapacity, investors are betting on the revival of Atlantic City's casinos, including those built by Donald Trump.
Over the next 2 to 3 years, barring some unfortunate rebuilding, I would anticipate Atlantic City could show double-digit growth.
This year, demand has dramatically pushed up the price of bonds for Trump's 3 Atlantic City casinos. Trump Taj Mahal bonds have doubled in price, Trump Castle bonds have risen 81%, and Trump Plaza is up 66%. But some on Wall Street still take a dim view of the Donald's bonds. Analysts continue to question Trump's management abilities, and they say the debt at his 3 Atlantic City casinos just may need more restructuring in the future.
Only the savvy investor that's willing to do the legwork should invest in it. Maybe the alternative would be to give it to a fund that has done very well performance-wise, has a very big emphasis on credit, and that would be a good alternative to investing in junk.
And others caution would-be bondholders that the big gains in the prices of Trump bonds have already been made. Still, some say Atlantic City's future is growing brighter with the help of more lenient gambling rules.
The number of slot machines that you can have has been increased dramatically. Going to 24-hour-a-day gaming over the weekends, the likelihood that will be 24 hours, 7 days a week looking out a year or two.
The key for Trump's casinos lies in the hands of the organization's new top executives. They must overcome debt, which at Trump Castle alone is nearly double the casino's estimated $200 million value. Jeff Lachey, CNBC, FNN.
And that's this week's edition of Weekly Business View. Join us Monday through Friday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for Business View, and again next weekend to wrap up the week's news. I'm Dean Shepard.
And I'm Sue Herrera. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.